Well, hello. Well, the other day I met a lady and we were talking, and she started in on the bees and how all the bees were dying. She was walking in the woods and she wasn't seeing any bees. And I had to admit that I saw very few myself. Uh, this year, I was seeing a couple carpenter bees, but that's all I was seeing. Now, they made nests in my uh, covered deck up above in the roof. So I high hopes that then there'll be more of them hatch out next year. But it dawned on me that, that happened 10 or 12 years ago when it came out that all of a sudden, wait a minute, a bunch of bees are dying and hives are empty, and we didn't know why and we didn't know what was going on. And it was all laid at the feet of agricultural chemicals. So I decided to do some research. Let's check this out and see, you know, 12 years later, well, what's going on, with that? Is it been cured? Is it still just as bad? What's going on? Well, I Googled it and started reading articles and found some kind of interesting information. First of all, I found out that one article I read, was talking as how that, well, that initial research was somewhat questioned nowadays because it seems that the people that did it, the researchers that did it, had in mind they knew what the culprit was to start with. Hush. That they had in their minds already was agricultural chemicals, and so they worked their studies to prove their theory instead of being open-minded and seeing what it was. Then I read another study talking about the chemicals used, and they were saying, well, really the agriculture chemicals right now are much, much safer for bees and other things in the environment than what they were 20 or 30 years ago. And they went on to compare health of beehives that were adjacent to farmlands and comparing that with health of beehives that were in other areas away from farmlands. And they found that the bees that were around the agricultural areas were actually doing better than the ones that weren't. Part of it is availability, of course, of pollen. Around agriculture, there's a lot of things to pollinate, a lot of things for them to gather pollen from. But I thought that was kind of interesting. So I went on and kept researching it, kept reading articles, and Googled it 2 or 3 different ways to see if I could find out more. And basically what they think now is that it probably wasn't the chemicals, that it was probably some sort of a pandemic, some sort of a bacterial infection that hit bees that year that just kind of swept the globe. Something new that had made its, like the plagues back in the Middle Ages that swept through populations and then they were gone. So it was interesting. It was fun to research that and find out what had happened and what was going on. The other possibility was, of course, parasites of some sort, because that's a constant thing with beekeepers is they get parasites. But they thought that was the most likely. Maybe it was some sort of a pandemic. And the problem researching it was that the bees would just disappear. So they weren't finding a lot of dead bees to test, to see what was going on. Well, so then I'm thinking, okay, well, if that was the problem, and that problem's solved now, I thought, I wonder why there's not more bees around, because you'd think that there'd be more. Well, I found a couple of articles that sort of spelled it out. And you kind of almost had to read between the lines, but it was there. And pretty much that is the fact that the price of honey is not very high. Now, there's a lot of commercial beekeepers who cater to the agricultural industry in some states. So, in that case, you know, in those areas, there's a lot of bees. And I knew from looking at Facebook posts, gardening groups, that, you know, you'd see a post every so often that say, well, I've got this or that bush or plant, and the bees are just loving it. And I saw a couple of little video clips where they're just swarming this particular bush. There was tons of them. But apparently the deal is the price of honey is just not, the Americans don't consume much honey. A little over £1 per person per year. So the price is such that if you're not in an area where bees are leased out by farmers, that it doesn't pay you to put up hives for honey production. So that's why in some areas it's just not, you're just not seeing bees, and in other areas they're around. So the solution to all this is pretty simple and pretty easy, and it's just a matter of people thinking about it, putting two and two together. And that's just eat a bunch more honey. You know, honey's great. It's wonderful stuff. There's nothing that compares to it exactly. It's its own category. But it's just, you know, we just don't consume enough. Now, if we all doubled our consumption, which wouldn't take much, 2 pounds a year is not much, then, you know, it's a supply and demand thing like any other agricultural product, and the price would go up. Now, if the price went up, and it's still, here again, you're only buying a couple of pounds per person per year, it's not a lot. If the price went up, then it becomes commercially feasible to buy more hives and more nukes and start more hives, get them around, because, hey, the honey's worth harvesting. I can sell it, I can make some money. So that's the whole thing. It's just an update on the bees. I thought it was interesting. It was interesting to research it, and I kind of wanted to share it with everybody. So I want you all to have a quality day.